China is expanding its cities and building new urbanized centers in a bid to increase growth and income. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. According to government figures, China's urban population has grown to more than 813 million people. That's nearly 60% of the country. It's all part of a plan to expand cities, modernize the countryside, and build urban centers in rural regions. China's urbanization could mean new markets, investment opportunities, and a shift away from an export-driven economy to one based on domestic consumption. But such rapid urbanization is not without its challenges. There is much to talk about. Let's get right to our panel. Joining us from Boston is Weiping Wu. She is the director of Columbia University's Master's Urban Planning Program and the co-author of The Chinese City, focusing on China's urbanization. Uwe Brandes is the director of the Master's Program in Urban and Regional Planning at Georgetown University here in Washington. With us from New York is author, architect, and urban designer Stefan. And joining us from Chapel Hill, North Carolina, is Yan-Song. She served as an urban planning and transportation consultant in China and is currently the director of the Chinese Cities Program at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Yan-Song, let me start with you in Chapel Hill. According to current projections, China's urban population will reach 1 billion by 2030. By 2025, that's only 7 years away, China will have 221 cities with more than 1 million inhabitants each. Question is this the urbanization? Is this the best model for growth and expansion? And what's driving it?
The current model here in China, I think it's not only coming from the top, it's also coming from the needs of the local people. So I think it's a good model. People need it. People need to move to the cities for higher income, better public services, better amenities, so people can enjoy urban lives. In this perspective, it's a good model.
Weiping Wu, of course, this huge movement of people will require very careful planning, very sophisticated planning. What do you see as the major challenges for China in this kind of project that it's undertaking?
Yeah, you just mentioned that the number of people who will be urbanized. And I think behind this, we need to look at both the issue of whether people are completely urbanized, and whether land growth or land urbanization is outpacing the urbanization of people. So I think that's the first big challenge, and I think I would pose to the panel.
And how would it change China as a country? I mean, here we have a country where most people used to live in the rural areas. Now you have these big cities along the coastlines, which are developing. How will that change the country?
Well, urbanization is a very natural outcome of industrialization, and in the case of China, globalization and decentralization, and plus the unique geographical features of the country really promotes the urbanization more on the coastal region. And so this is something that I think is reached a point of no return. And we also know that urbanization and large cities tend to produce higher efficiency. And even in the sustainability terms, that per capita consumption of resources tends to be lower in cities. So urbanization is overall a positive trend for China, but also for other countries.
Uwe, urbanization may be a positive trend, but I'm wondering what kinds of challenges does it pose for things like employment or the social welfare system?
As we've just heard, we can interpret the long-term trends of urbanization as a larger component of the modernization and indeed the globalization of Chinese economies. Cities represent a portal to larger economies of scale, and also a way to connect to the global economy. We've certainly seen this in the major Chinese gateways, the global gateways along the coast. And their urbanization, the pace of change in those in those cities has astounded urban planners around the world. And now what we see is this trend towards economic investment, economic change in cities across all of China, with the very dramatic investments in countrywide infrastructure. And I think the most important of that, of course, is the high-speed rail network that has connected all these cities together, not just along the coast, but now into the interior of China.
Now, you've just returned from China. You spent a month there. What was your experience there?
Well, as I'm sure we can get into with the panel, I was deeply struck by two major trends in China. One is the outstanding transportation infrastructure that is being built across the country, and indeed from the country into the rest of Asia through the Belt and Road Initiative. The Belt and Road Initiative is no longer an idea, it's a reality, and it's changing Chinese cities. The second thing that I think is just such a major trend where innovation is occurring at a faster pace in China than in other cities around the world, and that is the drive towards the digitization of the economy itself. This is most widely acknowledged in the payment structure that occurs, and this is creating new kinds of local economic development within Chinese cities that really would have been unthinkable even 5 or 10 years ago.
Stefan L., how do you see Chinese planners meeting these challenges that they will face as this rapid urbanization is taking place? And what's the connection here between urbanization and economic growth?
Well, I think by and large, China's story of economic success is one of urbanization. It's lifted about 500 million people out of poverty over the past 30 years through this national policy of urbanization, because there seems to be this link between economic growth and urbanization. However, that doesn't mean that urbanization always leads to high quality of life. I think there's 3 big challenges that Chinese city planners are facing right now. One is related to human skill. The first wave of urbanization since the 1980s was really based on super blocks, very large blocks, about 500 by 500 meter, that don't really promote walkability and lead to a very car-centric city. The second challenge is related to sustainability. As we urbanize, surface areas become impervious, and this can lead to flooding in times of heavy rain, as we've seen in Wuhan. So dealing with sustainability is another challenge. And the third challenge, I think, is related to identity. How can you promote urban growth at the same time hold on to some of the values and the beautiful buildings of the past? So those are 3 big challenges they're coping with.
Yan Song, Stefan L. raises an important point there, and that is rapid urbanization is not going to automatically lead to a better quality of life for the people moving into the cities. So what kinds of precautions have the Chinese taken to make sure that they mitigate these dangers, these risks?
Right. As I just mentioned, people move to cities for better life. However, now they have suffered actually from diminishing quality of life. They have to commute longer hours to work. They have to breathe polluted air, and sometimes they also suffer from diminishing quality of public services. So in all this, how could we do to increase the quality of life? There are many measures that have been taken by the Chinese public officials. For example, the recent call for the shift from the GDP growth only agenda to a more holistic agenda of urbanization is really positive. So now we are looking into how we can create a more efficient, a more inclusive, and a more sustainable urbanization path.
And of course, Yan Song, these urbanization projects that the Chinese government is undertaking right now, they're not just challenges, they're also opportunities, aren't they? I mean, these are going to create opportunities for new markets, new investment opportunities, economic growth. How will these opportunities impact the project that's underway right now?
Absolutely. There are a lot of opportunities. China's urbanization created really a service-based economy that's not there just a couple decades ago. So many of the mega projects in terms of transportation infrastructure investments, new urbanized centers, new quality towns, and many of the new public parks, for example, are on the way to reflect the opportunities brought by the urbanization in most of the Chinese cities.
Weiping Wu, what about things like infrastructure in these new cities? It could be things like the provision of water, for instance, or energy, or waste removal, transportation, education. How big are those challenges? Are they being met in China?
Yeah, that's a really important point. And I think Chinese urbanization is accompanied by an astounding pace of infrastructure building. And that generally has happened to benefit most of the residents, especially in terms of transportation, public transportation, and other, water and so on. I think the most significant challenges are in two areas. One is water shortage, particularly in northern cities. And then second is this waste management. And I think as modernization picks up pace, people are consuming more. And the waste aspect, we know in a few years ago that Beijing had a very tragic flooding, primarily because sewage system was not able to keep pace. And I think at this point, one of the key challenges facing planners is setting priorities, right? Is it growth or is it quality of life? And then in addition to that, quality of life for whom, right? Is it cars or is it pedestrians on the streets? And I think all of the panelists have pointed to this kind of wicked problems that cities have to face now. It's not straight shot growth. It's also not straight shot quality of life. How do we incentivize and balance the different demands on planners?
Okay, we are going to take a break right now. More of our conversation when we return. Stay with us, you're watching The Heat.